There was a woman who worked in the front of the office and she wanted to be an agent. So I encouraged her, like, you should do it. It took her a few times to pass the test, but then she was done. And I said, listen, I'll just have her work with me. You guys don't have to give her anything. I'll help her along and we get her up and going. About 6 months into that process, she was doing open houses for another brokerage with her friend who was an agent elsewhere. And I was like, whoa, you can't do that.
Wow, okay.
I'm like, that's just not allowed. Period. And she's like, well, I don't see any reason why I should go do your open houses when I can do this one with my friend. And I said, because you eat off of my stuff. You don't eat off your friend's stuff.
Yeah.
And I kind of realized, like, oh, you might not be the right fit to assist me with the overflow of my business.
Yeah. Welcome, everybody. I'm Kamil Sarji, your host of Just 2 Minutes today. And today's very exciting. I have Mike Tessier here.
Hey, everybody.
Mike, want to tell us about you? What do you do?
So I do a lot of different things. I'm a licensed realtor, have been since 2003. I'm also a licensed mortgage loan originator, and I also do commercial lines of insurance and personal lines. So I wear a few different hats, all surrounded in the same environment in businesses that we all work in. So it's exciting times.
Yes, for sure. So Mike's here because we want to talk about his background. It's super exciting things that he's been through. All right, so we're going to start our 2 minutes, just random questions, and
Sure.
then we can talk about the exciting stuff.
Absolutely.
All right. So I'm going to get my timer here. And now, so you're at a fancy restaurant and you know how they have the utensils everywhere. Which out of the 3 forks is your favorite?
Well, depending on what I'm eating, determines which fork I'm going to use. I mean, the salad fork is smaller with less tines than your dinner fork. And there's also your cocktail fork. So it really depends on what's being served.
If you were to use just one.
I'm a salad fork guy. Smaller bites. Like to chew my food, make sure it's properly digested.
Okay. Skateboarding, surfboarding, or snowboarding?
All three.
All three.
All three.
Which one's your favorite?
Still snowboard.
Snowboard?
Yeah, the kids and I do double black diamonds. They ski, I snowboard.
Have you ever been up so high and didn't realize like how dangerous it was, or how?
No, for the most part, I put both the kids on skis at 4. They're way better than I am. I try to keep up with them at this point, but we haven't come across anything yet that we can't handle.
Very cool. Are you a city boy or a country boy?
City boy.
City boy. So why do you hate the country?
Oh, I don't hate the country. I love it. I grew up in the city, so I have a lot of city mentality. I live in a town at this point, but the reality of it is it's not much different than a city. We live in different times than, 50 years ago. We're too connected today.
Where is this world going to be in 10 years?
10 years, huh? Whew. I don't know. I really don't. The only thing I worry about is what today's going to look like and what tomorrow's going to look like.
Okay. Very good. What did you think of that?
That was easy. It's good.
Random questions.
And it's only a couple minutes, right?
2 minutes.
Because you know full well that if you get over like 3.5 minutes, nobody watching you shit. I seem to get to that turnoff where I'm like 3.5 minutes into some stuff, unless it's like great content that you need to spend a few minutes on. After about 3.5 minutes, I'm like, all right, what else can I be doing while this is playing? Multitask it.
Yeah, that's why I chop them up into little shorts. But yeah, the whole interview, there's a lot of good stuff in there. So Mike, you have an awesome background, very interesting. That's why I wanted to bring you here today. So you started with a brokerage and pretty much went from being an agent, and then you started training and becoming this master sales trainer.
So true. What ended up happening is when I first got licensed back in 2003, I was in Franklin, Massachusetts, one of the hottest real estate markets in the country at the time. And 6 months into it, I hadn't had a sale. And I was prospecting, doing what limited I could. I had a sale, my first sale. It was $769,000. Got my commission check. This is great. It took me 10 years to sell another house for that value. Don't get me wrong. I figured out I didn't know enough people in the market I was in to stay in that market. I came to the Rhode Island market that we're in because I had more contacts, more leverage to actually do business. I also figured out that I could do 3 sales back in the mid 2000s at $250,000, $300,000 a piece faster than I could get and sell one of those houses for $750,000. So I decided I was going to make it up in volume.
So being in Franklin market versus here, what do you think was the reason? You think it was because you knew people?
So
Is that why Rhode Island versus Mass?
I was 26 years old. It's very hard to get somebody to hand you the keys to the most valuable possession when you don't know anything about buying or selling a house personally. Like it was a bit of a struggle. When I came to Rhode Island, the people that I knew were at an age where they were starting to buy houses. So they were buying starter homes. At which point it was easier to be their guide. I understood the pieces. I had a great mentor when I came in. He taught me how to prospect and work the business the right way pre-internet. When the internet came, he was retired at that point when the internet really took over in our industry. And it became, where do we go next? How do we make this work? There were a few years where it was just a transitional market. Then we had the housing fallout in 2008, 07, 08. The housing market fell out, watched a lot of realtors get out of the business. And it was a slow, progressive climb back. But, I changed brokerages a few times because you always think that the grass is greener elsewhere. You never realize you got to water your own lawn. And if you're not investing in you and in what you're doing, somewhere else isn't going to make it different. And then I connected as an agent working for Nathan and slowly started climbing through ranks of his agents. One of the things that I realized is that even though I was in my market with all the contacts I knew, I just didn't know enough people. I was limited by the people I knew. And I realized I had to meet more people. I had to get in front of more people.
At what point when you were with all these other brokerages, what point did you realize okay, Nathan is the one that's is the right one for me?
So listen, I have tremendous respect for Nathan. He built something that most people will never even comprehend or reach and achieve. So what I would say is I got to a point where there was another agent who got in the business maybe a year or two after me. And he'd gone to work with Nathan a few years before I did. And I started looking at his stats in the listing service. And he was doing 26, 30 houses a year pretty consistently. And I said, there's something there. So right before I went to move to work with him, I realized that the standalone agent step can't do this job as one agent for. If you want to be burnt out and out of business, you're one agent for a couple of years and find out how taxable it is. You have to be able to get to a point you can turn it off, have to the big weekends, give you some time. So as I was watching the statistics of this other agent, I flat out said to myself, because I got to believe in yourself first, and said, if you're doing that, I can do double that. I can do twice that.
Oh, nice. Competition.
So I went to work. I interviewed with a couple of other teams and organizations because I really was at a point where I didn't want to do it by myself. I figured that out pretty quickly in the business. And I went and interviewed with a couple of other teams, and their deal wasn't as good as Nathan's. Everybody complains about Nathan's deal, and his deal was still better than most of the other teams that people think have print deals. They don't.
Why weren't people seeing that when they were looking at brokerage? They didn't do the numbers right? Is that what?
Well, so... real estate has a lot of people that are more interested in being liked, and I see a lot of friendships or relationships in real estate that are there while you're at the same company. But then when you go to work for a competitor, you're no longer friends, or you're friendly enough if there's a deal to be had, but you're not going to go and have dinner with your family, things of that. So there's some change that goes on when I change companies and the camaraderie in the business. But as I started looking at the numbers of what they were doing, I started to realize I don't have time to make sure that I get where I'm not being. And one of the first things that we had to learn is that there's a process. Buying and selling real estate is a process. It's not an event. So once I understood the metrics of how to manage the business side of it, which is part of what he teaches you how to run it more like a business, they'll never let you see financials. That's what it is. But when you talk about why other agents don't see the benefits of going there, I don't know that, everybody's up on their split. Sometimes they're looking at the wrong numbers. An agent that gets 90%, or more out of their broker, he usually doesn't get broker services, doesn't get return phone calls timely. And it's nothing more than it's not enough in the bowl for the broker to want to be invested in what the agents are doing. And you start to figure out that they're focused on those big percentages, doing 4 or less sales a year on average, which is what the average realtor does, is 4 or less. So they're worried about their 90% on the 4 deals. Where if I could get half of the 90%, 45 or even 40, but do 12 deals, I think I'm winning.
Yeah. Because you're doing the math. It makes sense. It's
right. If you're going to put X amount of business in front of me, and I have to go capitalize on it, capture it and bring it home and then work it and get paid. Only instead of worrying about one or two deals, I should call it deal to dirty word, transactions at a time, where you're focused on those things, and every little thing that goes on in them is a major stress and anxiety. And I know you've seen agents when they have one or two transactions going on at a time, and they're really struggling with it. It's one or two. I wrote 15 in a month one time when I was an agent. Put 15 in February, which is a short month.
Yeah.
There was two other guys in the company that actually did those kind of numbers after me. One did it before me, one did it after me. But I went from selling, 15 houses a year on my own, which is nothing to sneeze at, a decent split, to selling 40 plus a year at a lesser split. But I was doing so much more, over twice the volume. Then I got to about 60 homes a year, and I started to realize that this was good. And I had to work my way up from doing 40 to 60. And there was competition. There was guys that were there ahead of me. They've earned their spots, and I kind of had to push them through. Aiken's cousin worked for us at the time. He would get 3 appointments to my 1, but he would sell 2 or 3 more houses a year than me. So my conversion was much better. But these are things, I didn't know these things until I got into the management. And then they were like, well, yeah, we used to send you on the hard stuff. We used to send you on this. But the flat out story. They were like, oh yeah, we full well knew. And we looked at some of these things like, you were the fit for this one. They're like, some of these guys work a better price point market. They're down in South County selling higher end homes, but you sell the hardest. That's easy.
Wow. And so you were still selling them, like they were giving you the hard stuff and you were still selling.
Multifamily is 5, 6 units, 3 units. At this point now, when somebody's got a multifamily and they want to start negotiating commission, we go the wrong way. They want to go down while I'm going up. I've had to explain to people, like, I'm sorry, you got a 3 unit here and you don't live in it? And they got 4 masters? I got 4 people I got to work with? I'm going to have to charge you 4 times the cost.
Yeah.
Nobody wants to hear that, especially investor.
It is a lot of work.
And I got to tell you, the
tenants don't want to show. They're like, oh, I'm busy. I need 48 hours. You can't do this. Like,
well, I'm going to throw out a gem right here. I wouldn't take a multifamily listing once I got to understand how to run the business properly if I had to notify the tenants. And I would flat out pass on it at the table if the seller wasn't going to notify the tenants. I'm telling this, I'm not interested. There's not enough money that you can pay me to do this if you're not going to be involved. And I'd have to explain to them, we're in this together. And your boss is over there and going to get in our way. So how this works is, instead of them telling you, no, it's not convenient, blowing me off, not being there, locking the door, flipping out when I put the key in the door and having me arrested, which I don't want to have happen. I would just rather have you let them know when we're going to show the property, so that when they pull all the crap that they're going to pull with me, with you, eventually you allow that idea that they're stopping you from getting what you want. And then you're going to make the appropriate moves to make sure we all get what we want. And, if that's one gold nugget that comes out of this for people, when you talk about understanding your value, I know my value is not chasing around a bunch of people that don't want to see the building sell. There's no value in that. So I would rather pass on the business than know that I'm going to lose.
Wow. That's awesome. That's interesting, because it is a lot of work having to deal with, trying to get, and the tenants don't want to sell the home because they don't know what is going to happen with the new tenant, the landlord.
The best investors, people that understand that time is money and that it's not just about them, will do it. People that only care about themselves and don't give a crap. They don't care if the building sells or not. They do if they get their number. But the reality of it is they don't want to put any work. No, I'm handing it to you and I'm done. That doesn't work in today's world. I'm sorry. You put all these people in here that don't respond, don't do whatever. And then, when the landlord's involved in the setting up of the showings on these multifamilies, when the feedback starts to come back, I've had them show up. I've asked them, why don't you come on? You just stand there and listen. And you can actually follow these people through your building to see what it is. We don't have to tell them who you are. I've done it. Usually they walk out and they're like, all right, take the price down. And it isn't that was my objective. It's the fact is, you think you're holding this piece of gold, and it is gold, but it's not polished.
I love that.
And you want polished money. You want market value, but you're not delivering a market value product. Well, the buyer wants market value products to market value money. It's that simple. So these are ideas that once we can convey them without it becoming nasty, aggressive, or anything that would be a put off to somebody, you're going to win 9 out of 10 times just being professional, having boundaries, walking from people. I've done more business from people that I've told I didn't want to work with them, and they wouldn't leave me alone because they're like, well, no, somebody said I had to talk to you. And I would tell them, yeah, but you don't want to do it the way it needs to be done. I'd rather pass. I don't want to do it this way. And eventually they come around, they go, well, I gave it to somebody else and they couldn't sell it. I go, right, because they didn't understand you need flood insurance on your property. When I sold you the house, we talked about this.
Yeah.
You were cash. You don't need flood insurance. But when you go to sell it, you're going to. I'm like, nobody wants to pay $5,000+ for flood insurance. They get nothing for it. And as you start to explain to these people the little things they forget, they start to come around and be like, you're right. Okay, let's do it your way.
Yeah.
It works. It's an event. It's a process, not an event.
So at what point did Nathan say, you know what, I want you to run or be the sales trainer?
So it's an interesting dynamic. There was a woman who worked in the front of the office and she wanted to be an agent. So I encouraged her, like, you should do it. It took her a few times to pass the test, but then she was done. And I said, listen, I'll just have her work with me. You guys don't have to give her anything. I'll help her along and we get her up and going. About 6 months into that process, she was doing open houses for another brokerage with her friend who was an agent elsewhere. And I was like, whoa, you can't do that.
Wow, okay.
I'm like, that's just not allowed, period. And she's like, well, I don't see any reason why I should go do your open houses when I can do this one with my friend. And I said, because you eat off of my stuff. You don't eat off your friend's stuff. Yeah. And I kind of realized, like, oh, you might not be the right fit to assist me with the overflow of my business.
Yeah.
So about 6 months later, one of my investor clients had a tenant and he said, I want you to take this kid on. So I talked with him and I was kind of like, yeah, I'm not sure. But when I met him, I was instantly impressed with him. I didn't like his phone skills.
How do you know if you have a good salesperson?
Well, at this stage of the game, there are tests out there that determine different personality types and different motivations. And some of those tests are highly effective. If you've
Did you test them or did you ask or talk to him and try to interview?
I talked to him on the phone and I just didn't like the way he communicated on the phone. A lot of yas, a lot of, like slang. He was young, millennial type kid, but he didn't understand how to talk to people that are actually going to do something. But when I met him, I liked him. He had the right look. He had the right set. I figured we can polish him. So he came on and worked with me about 6 months in. Like I just said, just drive in the passenger seat of the car. You're going to return phone calls to these people as we go to appointments because I would be 25, 30 appointments a week for real estate. I'd be going all over the place. So I just had him get in the car and ride with me. And then he would hear phone calls with clients and stuff and start to understand how to do the business, how to move things along.
Yeah.
And he started getting better about it. And then there was one day he and I were in the office and I was showing him some math on the board and explaining it. And Nathan and Rachel, who was he's his president now, were in their office listening to me explain to him. And 6 other agents came to sit because they couldn't understand the concept that we were talking about income and expense on multifamilies. And as I was explaining it, and a little background, my mom's a teacher, my grandmother's a teacher. So I grew up with teachers.
Yeah.
I understand how to teach and coach somebody along, because they used to do it to me. So I was giving him the advice and it, we got to a point where like every Tuesday in the afternoon, we would be there and more agents started showing up to listen and to try to learn some things. And then we got to a point where it was COVID had happened and I was actually at home with COVID laying in bed. And I got a phone call where Nathan said, I want you to be my sales manager. And I said, no, I'm not interested. I'm like, no, not interested.
It's a lot of work.
He's like, no, we should talk about it. I said, no, I'm just not interested in it. So we talked about it another time. And I said, I don't know. I don't think it's for me. I don't play well with others. Like when I want what I want it. I don't let too many things get in my way when I'm after something.
Yeah.
So we had a good chat about that. And then finally he said, look, I don't know if the guys on the team will follow anybody else. You're one of the few guys that throws it down, speaks up, says how it has to be. And then you also have the track record to prove that it works. He's like, I got some guys here that could probably be better at educating, but I don't think that the group will follow them entirely. He's like, they'll all follow you. They know full well, like you get on the phone, they've heard you deal with people to the point where in 5 minutes you've solved something that most of us are like, how the hell are they going to get through that?
So did everybody already know you by that point? At that point, like,
yeah,
when he asked you,
I was 5 years on the team at this point.
Okay, yeah,
like I had earned a spot. Yeah. They knew I was in the top 3 consistently every year.
Mad respect already.
Yeah, there were 3 categories we were tracking, and I was number 1, 2, or 3 in all 3 of those categories. I was never 1 across the board, but I was always in the mix on everything. So I had a thorough grasp of everything, and I was the only agent that did commercial at the time, commercial real estate. So doing that piece of it too, adding that in was like, well, you're the most well-rounded, polished, and capable. Plus, after I'd been training, the agent that worked under me and then all the other agents sitting in, and they actually were reaching out more and more. At the end of COVID, finally, he said, look, I just need you to do this so I can grow. It's like, I can't grow with anybody else. So we started doing it and we doubled. We went from 17 agents to 35 agents in about 12 months. And that was by testing for the right personalities, hiring people that we felt were coachable and trainable, and educating them on how we do it. It wasn't pleasant. And I would tell you we had about maybe a 40% stick rate. So I would hire 5 to keep 2.
Wow. Okay.
Because in 30 to 60 days,
On top of like interviewing them and making sure they're good, the 5 that you thought would be perfect, only 2 would stay.
right. So we would start training.
Okay. And the train. Okay.
So we would do like a full week training.
Uh-huh.
And then they'd have a 30-day mentor program that we had instituted so that somebody would oversee what they did. And then I would get involved if the mentor came to me with issues so that we tried to keep them moving along. And we track everything.
It's great, like, if you can, like, accelerate the dropout so you know who's the people. Did you kind of, like, create it that way?
No. It just became the number that really kind of stuck around at 40%.
And what day of the 30 days would they?
It was different for every person. So everybody, usually when I say stick rate, we would 2 out of 5, it would probably take them about 6 months.
6 months to bust out.
6 months before they would either leave or we would occasionally ask people to leave. We were one of the only places that terminated agents, and we didn't terminate them for stupid stuff.
Yeah.
We terminated them for not being people of character, and I know that's something that a lot of people don't always understand, but if what they were doing wasn't upfront and in the proper way, why would we have those people around?
All right.
If they're doing this kind of stuff, they're going to keep doing it. And what are they going to eventually try to do to you? Some of them they couldn't sell. You get to the point, you'd be like, hey, we've given you this many opportunities and you've converted 0.
Yeah.
Maybe sales isn't for you.
Mm-hmm.
And some of them are still my friends. I've had people actually reach out to me, be like, you letting me go was the best thing you could ever done for me because I realized that wasn't for me.
And they're in different careers.
They're in different careers because
Yeah.
they would have been broke in 6 months. You don't have enough money behind you to be in real estate. How do you get started?
Okay.
And sometimes, I would ask them as I was hiring, you prepared to go 6 months without a paycheck? And they all said yes. And then in month 2, they'd all be crying they have no money. And they'd be like, well, we talked about this. Like, it takes 6 months to build a pipeline. It takes 6 months to get going.
Yeah.
I'm like, the advantage you have here is that if you're doing it, it'll work. If you're not doing it, it won't. And, I learned a lot about agents, interviewing and training a lot about agents. Not everybody's good at what they do. Some people do this because they have a passion for real estate, but they're not a true negotiator. They're not a salesperson. They're not somebody that, wants conflict or invites it. Not that I'm looking for conflict ever, but I'm not shying away from it either. If conflict's going down, we're going to stand our ground. And I think there's a lot of people in our industry, in the real estate industry, that the minute there's conflict, they're out. They can't handle it.
Yeah. They can just give up.
And unfortunately for their clients, those are the people that are losing because they're not fighting the hard battle.
So in that first week of training, what are the, in order, the most important thing that you're teaching? What's the top 5 things that you're...
Well, it's been a few years since I did the training, but ultimately the training would be to explain to them how we worked as an organization, how they were to utilize all the right people in the organization to take the load off of them so that they could focus on just sell. The whole goal was to get salespeople to go sell, not to hire people that liked real estate, that don't sell. I don't get a broker's license because I don't understand the idea that not every realtor wants to be let's go all the time. And in business, I struggle with that idea. Like, people want to have businesses, and I get passive business. Hey, I put money into this so that somebody else can run it. They've got their salary and I get my residuals or whatever you want to call it, my piece of the pie. In real estate, though, I found that there's people that get in it just so that they kind of have something to do when they feel like doing it.
But during the interview, wouldn't that pop up when you're kind of interviewing these?
Yeah. So when I would interview people, I would ask them a series of questions. We would have a very straightforward interview to try to find out a little bit about who they were, why they wanted to be in real estate. That was always one of the questions. Why do you want to do this?
Why?
What's your why? And most of if they couldn't answer that question, why would I want you? So it would be like, why do you want to be in real estate? Well, because I've always loved doing it. Okay, why should I want you? Well, I'll work real hard. I'm like, sure, everybody says that. I'm like, but what do you bring to the table? And you have to ask those questions.
You have to bring these out that they didn't even think of. Sometimes they don't even know.
One of the best questions that Jamie gave me was, when you were in high school, did you play sports? And usually, the people that played sports, I played sports. I was like, great. Did you start? Works you on the bench? Believe it or not, though, it says a lot about who they are. Because most of the time they'd be like, no, I started. Okay. So you got a bit of a drive. You're competitive. I sat the bench. Oh, and not that that's a problem either. I just be like, oh, and then we move on. So what else did you do? Were you involved in other you know what I mean? Like, wow. Because if I've already eliminated that you're not competitive, and it's not that you're not competitive, but you might not be competitive enough. And in the sales game, you better be ready to go for it. I would try to find people that were all in, people that had nothing to lose by going after it.
Okay.
And it's hard, people will tell you exactly what they will and won't do if you listen.
And especially if you get someone who's doesn't make anything and kind of has to like trust the process and trust in what they're doing is going to get them money. That's hard.
It is hard. It's not hard when you're sitting in a room full of people that are doing it. Because, the buyer agreement, most companies didn't do that until recently. And I can remember agents saying, like, no one will pay these numbers. No one will do this. And I would stand in front of 35 agents and just be like, I don't know. We built a brokerage off of this idea that people do this.
Yeah.
Like, this place runs because of the fact that we run it this way. But those people that don't believe or, well, I don't feel right doing it. Okay, well, maybe you should think about if this is the place for you or not. It's not personal, and that's the biggest thing. It's not personal. It's business.
Yeah. So after the interview and they kind of like, because there's some techniques and like different things that you can play games. You said, is there a test or anything that someone can do?
So I would meet with these folks and interview them. And if I liked them and I felt like they were somebody that we could move, and then we would send the test to them.
What kind of tests?
Personality profiling, sales test.
Okay.
Things like that. Try to get a baseline on.
And how accurate and how, like, what percentage is that accurate to finding the right salesperson?
So you set metrics that you're looking for and you draw the line where you're not going to go below these metrics. And I can tell you that 75% of the people with the metrics that we hired underperformed.
Really? Okay.
I was taking brand new agents, no experience, training them, and they were doing 20 plus sales a year in the first year.
That's amazing.
A brand new agent.
So interview and the test, 75%.
Because they hit the certain metrics we were looking for.
Yeah.
My friend Nathan said to me, if you want to hire people that are really going to go out and do it, like hit it out of the park, find poor, hungry, and determined people. He's right. Every time we've hired somebody that had some means or whatever, they don't want to do it. They decide that they're going to show up when they feel like it because they don't need the money. Same thing with people that have full-time jobs that want to get into this. The reality is they pick and choose when they want to work this because they have their full-time job. The minute something doesn't fit in the part-time real estate world, that's what goes away. They go to their job, they go to their family event, and they don't service your client. And I mean, you're a broker owner, even though your agents sign these clients up, they're your clients. You're actually the guy on the hook for them. The agent's got some, you've got the bulk. So the last thing you want is someone running around not treating a client right because it's your real estate company that's getting the ding on it.
So now that you have these perfect candidates, new agents, what does it take to get them to be high producing agents? I mean, besides the support and the opportunities.
You got to find them qualified opportunities. And then there's a piece where goal setting is important. They have to have goals. There has to be some sort of accountability. Again, running a team like a business versus running a real estate office hoping they want to be in business is different. And for me, that's my journey since parting with them and going to a few other brokerages. I realized not everybody wants to run their business this way. And that's fine. Everybody should run their business the way they want. But when I look at some of the things and they're always thinking that it's going to be better elsewhere, the question is, how come you haven't invested in you yet to make it better? And, everywhere I've gone in my journey has been to improve myself, not to just figure out if I can make it, better over there and easier. Like, I'm not looking for the easier path.
Yeah,
it's clearly not the road. But I would get them through the test. I would get them trained. I would get them in front of qualified prospects. And
the trained part, what are you training?
We would role play. We would go over procedure. We would go over documents. We would go over terminology to insert into contracts and terminology to never allow in a contract. And we would drive the point like, don't just roll over. If the contract's not right, if it's not meeting these standards, stop the car, pull it over, take a breath, whatever you got to do, go back to the table and let them know this and this and this have to be corrected. And we would try to teach them how to read the contract, how to understand it, how to understand that everything you put into the contract has a cause and an effect. I worked with a very gifted agent who used to put redundant cycles in her contracts to the point where like you couldn't remove it. I mean, you could, but it was like, if this doesn't happen, then this won't. And I'd be like, you got to take that stuff out. I'm like, all you're doing is creating a situation based off a document that either they surrender or they don't. Like, it's already accounted for. You're just making it redundant. Like I said, she was gifted, but she overthought it really badly. Hopefully those things have changed since she's moved on. But yeah, we would teach them how to manage the transaction, how to interact. It's hard to teach people to be on time. It's hard to tell people to get dressed, but you have to do it. Like we're professionals. You know, there's nothing worse than when you show up to somebody who just came off the golf course, the sweat running down their head. Listen, I love golfing. I'm not a great golfer, but I love to golf. But I don't rush from the golf course to an appointment. I show up dressed to do business, you know, and that was a hard lesson to learn, but it's important. You know, people want to be professional, but they don't want to be professional all the time.
Right.
You know, and to some degree, like on the weekends, if I'm out and someone's asking me questions, you know, and I'm with my family or whatever, I'll be like, listen, I'd love to chat with you. Why don't you give me a call one day? We'll make it time. I'll come out and meet you. I'll have coffee with you, whatever, you know, because the reality is I want to have this conversation, just not on my family's time. We can't bar family time for business anymore.
Because you've done that in the past. Like,
You're cheating on your family with your business.
Yeah.
You can only serve so many people, you know, and at some point you got to be in the moment. So yeah, you got to turn it off. But you have to be able to afford to do those things too. Some agents, you know, need to build enough business that they can pick and choose.
Yeah.
Choice is important.
Great information. So do you go out with the agent on a showing or a listing appointment? Or you've done a lot of role play that you don't even need to?
So we did a lot of role play. And then, you know, if it was a listing appointment, we would have the newer agents, once they mastered working buyers, then you start teaching them how to work a listing. Because if you don't understand what a buyer's going through buying a house, how are you ever going to explain it to the seller when the seller's got their own issues going through their heads on this stuff?
Yeah.
So usually you'd have to be with us and have a track record, you know, for listings. But yeah, we would send you out on appointments with another agent to see how he did it. I would go out with the agent when they would have their opportunities. And for the first 5 or so, I would just do the listing appointment, secure the listing, let them run it so that they would at least have the experience of the business on the back end. I would go get it.
Yeah.
I'd bring it in and I'd bring it in and I would ask them flat out, like, what's the number? What's the percentage we're charging here? And they'd be like, blah, blah, blah. I'd be like, okay, so I'm going to try to get more. I'm like, and, you know, let them negotiate. I'm like, but if that's the bottom, that's the bottom. All right. And I would just go and get it. And they would learn a lot, you know, and there were a lot of times where I would have to go meet with their clients with them to go over home inspection. So, you know, as the sales manager and the trainer, it really did take time at nights and weekends on top of the full workload of going to make sure that they're successful. Eventually, you get to a point where the statistics are in their favor, where it's like, I don't need to go with you anymore. You can do the job. You know, I would go with them for the first 5.
Okay. I was going to ask, like, how many?
It was about 5.
Times?
And I would help them secure the first 2 or 3. Then I would have them do it. And I was there to make sure we didn't lose. Like, you run the process. I'm just here to observe. And we would tell them flat out, just here to observe.
Yeah.
You know, oh, blah, blah. Wouldn't tell them exactly who I was. You know, I'd just be like, no, I'm new, whatever. And I would just sit there. And then there's a slide that had my picture, you know, when we were doing presentations. So that would come up and they'd look at me and I'd be like,
come back. I might be that guy.
You know, and then they would have questions like, oh, what are they new or whatever? And I'd be like, no, they've been with us for over a year. I'm like, I'm just here to make sure it's a quality control thing, you know, and it really was a quality control thing. Like, let's make sure that we're hitting the numbers, we're hitting the standards. You know, everybody thinks that everybody runs their business differently than they do. When you actually see how people run their business, it's either good or it's not. What works for one may not work for another. I like structure. I like discipline. I like goal setting. You know, I like achievement, accountability. Those are the things that drive everybody. People that don't like that stuff, they're not really the people I was looking for.
So all these things that you take into consideration as you're like building your sales training, how many hours in a day should someone put into real estate?
Depends.
Because, you know, you don't want to light nights and weekends. I mean, if you were aiming it right and doing
if you're not working 50 hours a week as a full-time real estate professional, you're not a full-timer. That's truth. You know, and while you're going to give up your Saturdays and your Sundays pretty regularly, and you're going to give up some weeknights pretty regularly, you know, you got to account for those 3-4 hour blocks somewhere. I shouldn't even generalize that, but the average person, if they're working 3 to 4 hours at night, means they're going to start their day 3 to 4 hours later in the day, or they're going to take a block in between for themselves unless they have another job. But I would find to do 40 plus sales, it's Monday through Friday of setting it up so that you can work the nights and the weekends. So it's really like 60 plus hours to do volume, to handle that much of a load.
Yeah. Wow.
So yeah, when you think about those things, it's definitely, you got to have the right personality and mindset to go chase that kind of business. Well, you know, the average agent's pretty happy doing 1 or 2 a month. 2 a month's a good life. It's a good living. 1 a month pays the bills. You might be a little bit broke here and there, and, you know, have a little debt you're carrying, you know, and you also don't want to get in trouble with the tax man. Because once that happens, it's a slippery slope.
Yeah. So if we were to take someone and throw them in middle America where they don't know anybody, what do you suggest for them? How do they become a successful agent?
Well, I would think if you're taking somebody, an experienced agent or someone fresh, no experience.
Experienced agent.
Experienced agent, you drop them in the Midwest with no contacts.
What should they do?
Well, the first thing they should do is probably go meet with every loan officer and title attorney in their market
Mm.
and start building up a network through that, because the loan officers are going to be looking to build that relationship and, you don't know anybody. So now you need to get invited to some networking events where you might actually meet somebody or get to a point where you start getting a loan officer that wants to partner with you to host home buying seminars so you can actually try to meet with people. I would say to have that person do some credit services so that they can start thinking about the high hanging fruit, not just the low hanging fruit of, hey, these people have a 620 credit score and, they can get a mortgage, but they'd like to get a little bit of a better rate. We're going to put them on ice for 6 months and then not ghost that person. Like stay in the present with them because all their friends are going to hear like, oh, this realtor's helping me fix credit. He's got me connected with a loan officer that's doing this so that I can absolutely get this done the right way and get them to buyability so that they win. And when they win, I win.
Mhm.
And it has to be a win-win. That's the thing the agent doesn't realize, or most agents need to realize is that it has to be a win-win. If your client wins, you win.
Yeah.
If the client wins and you don't win, then you didn't set up the expectation or your paperwork properly, and that's just what it is. We've talked earlier before we got on the podcast, about agreements and enforcing them. And what I've found is that if you set up your agreements properly, you should always be able to come out with enough to feed your family and move forward.
Yeah. What was that feeling like when you trained a new agent, and then you saw them become super successful, getting awards? And what was that feeling like?
Oh, a huge sense of pride, like a father pride. I nurtured this person. I gave them some tough love some days, but I always had their interests in their back. And my team knew that. Like the people that worked under me, they knew full well that if they called me at 10 o'clock on a Tuesday, I would still take their call. If they needed me to go meet with somebody because they were struggling, I would do it. If it was 7 o'clock at night, like I really had their backs. I went and fought the hard battles for them. If I knew the contacts, if I knew who was involved and I had a relationship, I would get heavily involved. The goal was just make them successful, and when they were successful, I was successful. So it was a good fit. Their interest was at heart.
I mean, you've changed so many people's lives. It must be amazing.
I have a lot of people that I still am in contact with that I used to work with that absolutely still reach out to me for advice. Like,
Yeah.
hey, what do you think of this or that? I tell them all the time, I'm always here. I'm always available. I'll always get back to you. But, our time working together was good, but they've moved on in different directions as have I. So I don't see us crossing paths again. It'd be great if we did, but I think I gave them enough they can go stand on their own.
That was the last question. Have you thought about starting your own real estate coaching or training?
I have. I've spent the last year and a half or so looking at what's going on in our industry, trying to figure out where the need is. One of the biggest problems that I'm running into, and I don't know if it's just me or the way I look at things, but it's something that I'm heavily worried about, is that some of the dynamics of these folks is very self-centered. So they're not willing to invest in their business, in the marketing of their business. They would rather buy a new car. They would rather buy new clothes and go on vacation than investing in the business so that the business can provide a car and clothes and a vacation. So, as they're doing this and they're not willing to invest in the business, most of them are willing to invest in themselves. I can put out free material and do all the free in the world, but I'm only going to get broke people that don't know how to make money, and there's no benefit to anybody in that because they're going to come, they're going to show up, they're going to suck up the time, and then they're not going to go do any of it. It's just that poor, hungry, and determined thing.
Yeah.
Do they have that?
So are you going to start a? You going to start one?
No, probably not. I'm at a point where I don't know exactly where the next road is. I'm still waiting on a few things to kind of work themselves out. I'm very curious to see how the industry reacts to the new way that we deal with the non-commission split. I'm very curious to see how that goes. I think it's going to be 12 more months of a lot of folks trying to figure it out. I just, I'm not quite sure I'm ready to throw my hat back in the ring. I've been on the sidelines the last couple of years, semi-retired from the real estate industry. I've been doing the mortgages and I've been doing the insurance, but in terms of working buyers and sellers, I've been very selective on the ones I've worked. Mostly just because just sitting back, not really looking to do more than I need to, but I'm in the process of building something.
How do people get in touch with you?
They can Google my name, comes up. I own my own domain. Bought that thing the day I got into real estate. I bought my name. I've got a web address for the real estate. I've got a web address for the mortgages, and we're going to have a web address for the insurance. Like I said, I've been looking at a lot of different pieces. I've been looking at how to market effectively, trying to figure out some pieces. AI is something that's, unfortunately, it's here. And if we don't embrace it, we're going to be extinct. So I'm trying to figure out how to leverage that into all of this.
Awesome. Very exciting.
It is. I think ultimately I'd like to maybe develop a one-stop shop with all the services that I can provide in one location, and build out something like that. But we'll see. Yeah, I think the next 12 to 18 months is going to be a heavy indicator on which way it goes.
Awesome. Very cool.
Yeah, I appreciate your time.
Well, yeah, thanks for stopping by and getting interviewed by me.
Anytime, Kamil.
Take care.
Take care.